What's happening, good people? Coast to Coast podcast coming at you. Emergency edition, commitment pod. Boy, this is one that Hubert Davis and the staff needed. Finally get another top 10 player into Chapel Hill, as if we forget that, that Ian Jackson is on the team. But Caleb Wilson from right outside Atlanta, it seems to be a consensus top 10 player, has chosen to attend UNC Chapel Hill, and is a big recruiting coup from Hubert Davis. You may have seen, and we teased it here. Travis Branham's been all over this. Sherrell has been all over this. But commits to North Carolina. Huge win. One of the biggest remaining unsigned names, I think, out there. But is committed to the Tar Heels. Sherrell, like we always do at this time, how did this happen?
It was a long road to get there. He's had an offer from UNC for not quite 2 years. I think the first time we saw him was 2 years ago. He's playing against Drake Powell, actually, in Atlanta at an EYBL stop. And I remember talking to a few people there, and they're like, this is the next guy. He's going to be the one everybody's after. He's got just a rare combination of athleticism, size, and some, we'll call it developing skill. And so over the course of the next 2 years, you started to see him become more assertive, especially on the defensive end. And UNC, to its credit, kind of stayed there. There were times, many times, throughout this recruitment where it looked like it was going the other way. I think really over the summer, we had talked to his father, Jerry Wilson, and just kind of said, hey, where do things stand? Because there was supposed to be another visit, and the visit didn't happen, and there wasn't a lot of buzz with UNC. And he was like, actually, they hadn't been hitting me up that much. And then about June, I think it's like June 29th, June 30th, he said, we talked to Hubert, and we still think Carolina could be a good place for Caleb. So you move on, through this summer. And again, with the way the transfer portal and the way high school recruiting have gone the last couple of classes, you thought that maybe this was one that UNC couldn't win. And then UNC has an in-home visit with him in September that by all accounts was amazing, and his dad was kind of raving to us about Hubert Davis laying down the law and saying, these great things about Caleb and how much he wanted him and needed him, which is a common refrain from Hubert Davis. So that following that was an unofficial visit this past October. He took an official visit to the Duke game not quite a year ago, and then a unofficial visit in October, and that really kind of helped push UNC towards the front alongside Kentucky. I think what finally seems like it sealed the deal is UNC went down there, I think it was the day after the Florida loss, and had an in-home visit with Caleb and his family. And from then on, it's kind of been hearing stuff about UNC, and it seemed like Carolina was in the lead. So I think it's just they pursued him. They had a need and a want for him, as Hubert Davis would say. And then we're not going to play coy and pretend it's not there, but they also financially, I think, made it worth his while. So you add all that together, and that's, in this day and age, how you sign a top 10 player like Caleb Wilson.
Sean, I'm going to ask you. I'm sitting here. You think about Caleb Wilson. We've seen some of his highlights. At least I've seen some of it. He does attend Holy Innocents just outside of Atlanta. He's 6'9", 205 right now, so a little slighter frame. But again, you're talking about a kid that has a 5-star 99 ranking on 24/7. I'm going to ask you, what's the biggest thing that he brings to the table? And then is there a skill, or is it just outright athleticism, do you think, that makes him so elite?
Well, I think in terms of what he brings, as Sherrell mentioned, the top 10 pipeline, you had Ian Jackson, and it's funny, since it was on the message boards of it being a little over 2 years ago when Ian committed, I went back to listen to that commitment podcast just to see, hey, how did we sound then versus now? And I think we started talking about what this means for the 2025 class, given how early the 24 class got wrapped up. And obviously, if this had all been put together earlier, I think maybe there wouldn't have been as much cause for concern from the class. But I think it does bring that cachet of UNC getting a top 10 player, beating out Kentucky for a top 10 player. But in terms of what he brings, 6'9", 7-foot wingspan, really, I'd say a 4. There's a lot of tantalizing things about him, or as Sherrell mentioned, kind of the growing skill set. He runs the floor extremely well. He's strong rebounder, can get out in transition. I'd say for me, in terms of improvement points and things to watch for, is really what can he do this spring and summer. I think always the scary thing is with these top 10 players is most likely they're going to be one and done. So you do want that one and done player ready to contribute versus somebody that might realize his potential really in years 4 or 5 years down the road. And right now I'm thinking that's probably more realistic, that there is a lot of potential with him, and I don't know if it'll be fully realized in Chapel Hill if it is just one season. I think he does, as I mentioned, he runs the floor well. He can not afraid to shoot the three, but over 2 years in the UIBL, he shot 20% from the 3-point line, and kind of those shots were all over the place. So here's a guy probably not a true stretch four. Also a guy that he can dribble the ball, he can handle it, but you probably don't want him doing that too much or going one-on-one unless he has a mismatch. So I think in terms of who UNC is able to put around him will be really important, as well as what he's able to continue to do from a skill set and improvement perspective over the summer. But I think just from a mental perspective, from an AAU side, he played on the Georgia Stars. He was the best player for 2 years. And after the first session this last year, he made a switch. And I think that was, hey, I can get 20 shots, but we're going to be losing every game. And he went to Joey's favorite team, the Knight Riders, and who was one of the best.
That's DAZ is how that's spelled for those of you at home keeping score. Go ahead. Sorry, Sean.
Where he became more of a tertiary option. They had the Boozer twins as the focuses, and his synergy numbers and efficiency were off the charts. And there's one game in the semifinals against Team Takeover, very talented team. Dixon was on Takeover, probably not the strongest of bigs, but I think he went 14 of 18 in a semifinal game, and a lot of that was offensive rebounds, running in transition. I think he can be very dangerous from that 12 to 15 foot range. So there's a lot of skill. The concern is that it is like, hey, he can do a lot, but what is he going to be able to do at an elite level right away, or as you grow into it? And I think that's going to be what we'll be talking about, going forward. But to summarize, it is a great addition, being a top 10 guy and having, especially defense, from a defensive end, the versatility he can bring, and I think the 4, the 3, the 5, having that versatility is obviously very important right now.
I think, yeah. I think. Well, hang on, Sherrell. I think that's a really good point. Does he ripen in between October and late March of next year? I think that's a really, really good question to ask. Go ahead, Sherrell.
Yeah, I want to say two things. With rankings, you have to realize they are not college impact rankings. They're not saying that he's going to be the 9th best freshman in college basketball next season. They're saying he would probably be like the 9th pick in the NBA draft. The goal is to get the NBA draft picks right. So they're not projecting college. They're projecting way past college into the NBA. So think about that a little bit. And then the other thing is, I was listening to that podcast too, Sean, when you sent it. And one of the things we said was that getting Ian and Drake and Cadeau, who was then in the 2024 class, would help with 2025. But they committed so early, it was 2 years later when they started to play actually for UNC. So I do think what Jackson has been able to do this last month and a half and what Drake Powell has been able to do pretty consistently this season, I do think that had an impact on Wilson because, of his other schools, they haven't produced under their current coaches any one and dones either. Whereas Hubert Davis now is going to more than likely have at least one. Let's put the line at 1.5. He's going to have one. Whether or not he has 2, we'll see. First round picks, one and done. But I think that's important to remember too, is that the impact of 2024 couldn't happen until they got on the court, and now less than a month after they're really starting to get into their groove, UNC's got another top 10 commit.
Yeah, I'm going to give you. I'm still going to give you like 200, minus 200 odds on that, even if you take the over in that situation, Sherrell. So, Sean, I'm sitting here thinking about getting a player like this. Can you think of who the last Tar Heel player was that had a game similar to Caleb Wilson's? And I know you hate player comps, so I'm trying to limit it. Who would you best liken him to? Not that it's one for one. Who would you best liken him to that's worn the Tar Heel uniform?
Well, real quick, since we are talking about a podcast 2 years ago, I think I did bring up some comps in that one of Kobe White from a UNC perspective, scoring wise, and Malik Newman from a college perspective. So not bad on those, but in terms of UNC, looking at the four, I think that's tough. I mean, to an extent, Marvin Williams just from the four, but the skill set was so different. Which Marvin
was a
brought.
legitimate stretch four.
Yeah. Beautiful stroke.
Yeah.
Etc. But I think he is one of those guys where you see. I think that a lot of other teams have gotten over the years, and he's 6'9", long,
athletic as all get out.
Well, I wouldn't in a straight line perspective. Yes, one of the things I think not concerning, but when he is in transition or in traffic, he doesn't have great lift off of 1 foot when he's being contested. So, he was challenged a lot, and I think with his need for strength as well as that lack of lift off of 1 or 2 feet, that might be. I'd say it's an area to watch going forward. So, I think that might be one of the misnomers from that elite athleticism. It's easy to see a 6'9" guy run up and down and handle the ball, shoot it, but there is a lot of skill development that's still needed. So I don't think there's a perfect one from a UNC perspective. I think we've often seen many other teams get kind of this four. But to Sherrell's point earlier, you always want, if it is going to be a one and done or two and done, a guy that is producing in college, not the one that is producing 5 years later in from an NBA or G League or overseas perspective. So that to me is the main concern I'm going to have with him, and maybe out of that NIL money that he's getting, percentage can go to a elite skill trainer over the summer, so that some of that potential can be realized in Chapel Hill versus further down the road.
I just assumed you were going to send LeVar Ball out here to help him because I know he's from your neck of the woods. All right, Sherrell. North Carolina now, with adding Wilson to the class, North Carolina has Isaiah Dennis and Derek Dixon, both top 50 players, 4-star players, comfortably as of the most recent 24/7 rankings. Are they done with 2025? Are there other things they're going to look for? Because, again, we're still talking about high school recruiting, but also the entire UNC roster is likely to turn over this coming year. Who knows? Do you feel like there could be a late riser that North Carolina adds to this, or do you think they're pretty done in high school recruiting for the time being?
Did you see what happened with the Wisconsin defensive back who transferred to Miami?
There ain't no transfer portal.
Yeah, so that's the point is that nothing is settled ever. So I wouldn't say like, oh, they're completely done in 2025. Who knows? Like, the example we've used on this podcast for at least 7 years now is super 5-star big man Johnny Williams could come onto the scene and say, I want out of my letter of intent and I want to go to Carolina. So you can't say they're done because you just don't know who's going to be available. In all likelihood, they are done, but you can't, in this environment, you can't just say anything is final really until classes start, as we've mentioned, in late August. And even then, there was player movement after then. So I would say they will be attuned to who asks out of their, I don't even know what it's called now, scholarship agreement / rev share / NIL deal.
Yeah.
Whatever they sign, they'll look for people who get out of that, and then they'll look to the portal as well. Because I do think with the potential for guys to have a 5th year, I mean, there are players in the ACC who are really good, who have accumulated a lot of rebounds and points, maybe against Carolina in the last couple of weeks, who could have a 5th year, who would be options. So between that and the portal, I don't think they're really ever done, even with high school recruiting. It just keeps going. It's all fluid forever.
It just basically means you never sleep again ever in your life, ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that point is who is Wilson going to be surrounded with, and to me, you need that passer because he can truly be that lob threat at the 4 that UNC has been missing for a while, whether it's transition or the half court. Hopefully he can improve just, I think, really more the form. The form. I don't think he's going to turn into a knockdown stretch 4 in a year. But can you have some strong shooters around him and then a more well-built 5 to offset some of the strength issues to let him play at that 4 spot. So to me, it's really around who's going to be around him for next year's season will be, I think, really important in terms of what stats and what numbers we're seeing from Wilson in 25-26.
All right, that's a fair way to lay it out, bro. Guys, before we get out of here, last thoughts on Caleb Wilson, Sherrell.
I just think it's a big win for UNC. Like I said, at the time they desperately needed it. Recruiting has been, yes, they got Dixon and they got Dennis, 2 guys who I think we will believe will be solid players at some point. But with the elites, they've struck out several times in a row, going back to the boozers. And I mean, they offered 18 or 19 guys in the 2025 class, and pretty much all the top 10. And you only need the one, and they got the one. So as much frustration as there's been with UNC's recruiting and with Hubert Davis, I think if you're going to criticize, you also have to give them praise when they do are able to get a good player. And Wilson is going to be a good player. I think where he will excel is on the defensive end. I don't quite want to call him a defensive anchor, but he's going to provide the rim protection that UNC has really sorely missed post Armando Bacot. He actually, in real life, has the ability to switch, I think, maybe 1 through 4. I think 5s might bully him a little bit in college, but he can really do those things. And then he can get on the open court and underrated, even though he can still gain weight and he's kind of slight of build right now, the dude fights for rebounds. Like, he really does go after it and has a motor when it comes to rebounding. So
you can never have too much of that.
Right. So for me, I'm looking at, can he be a lob threat, as Sean said? Can you give him a couple of touches where he has a face up and maybe a post where he has a jump hook, and then everything else is going to be rebounding, steals, running, finishing in the break. I mean, he should sprint rim to rim. He gets 6 points every game just by sprinting rim to rim because of his length and because of his ability to finish. So a really good fit for UNC with what they could have coming back. Again, it's going to depend on, all the roster stuff. But
a million things, yes.
Right, but at least he is a pretty vital piece. I think you can place it as the starting 4 immediately.
And that's something, again, that North Carolina, needs to not necessarily to have a starting 4, but to have one to rely on. Go ahead, man.
Let me add one more thing. It's kind of like the ghost of G.G. Jackson a little bit, because if you think think about it. Go back to when Hubert first got the job.
Do I need to get the air horns out? Do I need to find the old air horns?
I know, right? But it was like he wanted to find a stretch 4, and Wilson isn't exactly a stretch 4 like Sean said, but he wanted someone in this archetype who could play the 4, who could do a whole bunch of stuff, and he thought he had it in G.G. Jackson, and then G.G. decided to go elsewhere. Then he thought he had it in Jaron Stevenson, and he wanted to come to school early, and he went elsewhere. He thought he had it in Pete Nance, but Nance probably was really a center, shadowing as a 4, and he went elsewhere. And then this year he thought he had it with Jalen Withers, and Withers, he just has certain things that he does that aren't going to allow you to play him so much. He's gone elsewhere a couple of times. Right. and so it's like he finally got it, the high school stretch big or 4-man that he's been looking for since he got the job. So to me that's kind of funny, because it's like this is like the promise of G.G. Jackson kind of fulfilled almost.
Manifesting itself, I guess. That's didn't expect that we'd have multiple G.G. Jackson references here on this Caleb Wilson commitment, but here we are. That's probably going to make some people happy, but I had to throw it in there because we've had multiple references to G.G. on this show. All right, guys, we appreciate it. Once again, that is Caleb Wilson out of Holy Innocents in Atlanta, committing to North Carolina. Big recruiting win for the Tar Heels. Again, top 10 kid, no matter how you classify him. 6'9". Sean gave you a really good breakdown. Sean, I'm assuming we're going to see a little video action here relatively soon from you on IC.
Yep, it's coming out.
That's all you got? It's coming out. It'll be out eventually, about the time that this podcast posts, and as soon as we have some other write-ups, you'll probably see Sean's good video breakdowns, which if you haven't watched them, but I'm judging you a little bit. Guys, I appreciate it. Again, Caleb Wilson of North Carolina. For Sherrell McMillan, for Sean Moran, Big shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity for sponsoring this here show. It's a shorter show. Didn't get a chance to really mention them as a whole, but they're still amazing. And shout out to John Siegley for producing. Until next time, this has been an emergency edition of the Coast to Coast podcast here for InsideCarolina.com. I'm Joey Powell. We'll talk to you very, very soon.